welcome to Crime in Court. This is the 1996 Menendez brothers trial. We are reading through the transcript because we don't have video. And this is the defense's case in California versus Erik and Lyle Menendez. We are on part 23 of the defense's case, and this is Dr. Cyril Wecht, who is a forensic pathologist. He testified in trial time a week ago, and then now he's back on the stand. So his direct examination is continued from the week previous, and we're still on direct examination with Ms. Abramson, so we have a little bit longer to go for that. He's going to be on the stand for a few days, so uh, just letting you know. All right, so let us please get started. If you don't mind, hit that like button. It does help the algorithm and help spread this out to more people. All right, so the court says without the jury present, everyone is here. By the way, we're back from our morning break from December 4th, 1995. No jury present. Without the jury present, everyone else is here, says the court. Miss Abramson says, "We got a question or a couple of questions from one of the jurors, Your Honor." Court says, "Yes." Miss Abramson says, "I'll deal with a specific fact-based question in examining this witness. I'll try to answer that part of the question for the jury concerning what wounds are dissected and what wounds are not. The what constitutes an expert. What we would request is that the court at some appropriate moment tell the jury that at the end of the case, they will be instructed on expert testimony and how to evaluate it." The court says, "Well," Ms. Abramson says, "if you're inclined to respond." Court says, "I don't know if that's exactly what it is that the witness was or the juror was asking. Did the witness wish to have any suggestions on this?" Mr. Khan said, or sorry, "Did the people wish to have any suggestions on this?" And Mr. Khan says, "No, I think that I have no objecting to doing it the way that counsel is proposing." Court says, "All right, let's get the jury out." Jury enters the courtroom. The court says, "All right, the jurors are back and will resume with the testimony. We had one of the jurors submit one or two questions, and one of them had to do with a question of what is an expert or defining an expert, something of that nature. That area is covered in the court's instructions, which I'll give you at the end of the trial, defining what an expert witness is and how you evaluate an expert's testimony versus other witnesses. And that will be covered in the court's instructions at the end of the case. All right, you may proceed with direct examination of the witness." Ms. Abramson says, "Thank you, Your Honor." Dr. Wecht, I want to have you compare and contrast, if you will, two photographs that show the medial aspect of Mr. Menendez's right arm. The first is the one we are talking about before, 295B, which is here on the lower board. The photograph that we were saying from its appearance and the description in the autopsy report is the way that that wound appears in 295B, the way it appeared before any dissection was done. Yes, I would say it does. And comparing that, if you will, to 301C, which is this photograph up here in the middle, does the wound appear differently in that photograph? Yes, it does. It appears to have been extended, and it is my impression and my inference that that has been dissected and made larger by the actual incising or cutting through the area by the pathologist. Thank you. Even before that medial aspect exit wound was dissected, is it your opinion that it was a rather large wound? Yes, it is. And it's larger by far than the entry wound on the side of the arm. Yes. May I repeat once again, the entrance wound on the post-lateral aspect, the outer area, is approximately 2 inches in maximal diameter. The exact words of Dr. Golden, and the wound of the inner or medial aspect is 6 by 4 inches. So it is considerably larger, the exit wound, which is typical for a shotgun blast. Now, calling your attention to 301, the board that's now up there, can you see on that board the photograph that is labeled F, which is the single photograph on the right hand side showing the elbow? Yes, I can see it. Can you tell, strike that, based on the photograph and the description of the wound that Dr. Golden gave, is there any way to know whether or not at this time those individual pellet defects were made on the left elbow? If the arm were bent or the arm were straight or what position the arm was in? No. Looking at the picture, rereading again the description, I can't tell you the exact position of the left elbow. Could have been fully extended, it could have been partially flexed, or completely flexed. I can't tell you. So, this is one of the things within the crime that they cannot reconstruct. They cannot tell you how his arm was positioned at the time it was struck. Okay, now, with respect to the fact that the left elbow has a spread pattern, I call your attention now to the photograph in the middle of 301, which is 301D. Do you recognize that to be an enlargement of the scene photograph, the only photograph that shows some forearm pellet defects on Mr. Menendez's right arm? Yes. Based on the notion that the left elbow shows a spread pattern, well, first of all, does that right forearm show a spread pattern? Yes, those are individual pellet wounds. And the fact that the left elbow shows individual pellet wounds, is it possible that those two wounds are affiliated? Yes, that's a possibility. And calling your attention to the photographs that have been marked A and B on 301, the ones that show Mrs. Menendez's left breast and forearm, based on the fact that those are a spread pattern, is it possible that those wounds are affiliated with the left elbow and right forearm, or the right forearm? Yes. And with Mrs. Menendez's injuries, pellet wounds of the left breast, Dr. Golden's wound number 6 of her autopsy report, the answer to your question is yes. That's another possibility. And is there anything in the nature of the wound to Mr. Menendez's left elbow, to his right forearm, or to Mrs. Menendez's left breast slash left forearm that indicates that they were seated when they got those wounds versus standing? Well, first of all, there's nothing about them from the wounds themselves that tell me that they were sitting or standing. I then go to the pictures of the scene and I look at the couch, specifically the armrest, where Mr. Menendez would have had his arm. I see that couch, that portion of the couch in the television changer, a slender, rectangular shaped, typical TV changer or remote, I don't know why they keep calling it a changer, but remote, and find no evidence in any of the descriptions, nor do I see in any of the pictures of the couch that show any kind of shotgun pellet dispersal pattern. Therefore, I find it extremely hard to understand how he could have gotten those wounds of his left elbow while he would have been sitting in that location. Obviously, if the arm was down low below the armrest, then we know he couldn't have gotten it. So it has to be a little bit up. And if you had a dispersal pattern that is already occurring by the time it hits the left elbow, then by definition, after the shotgun blast, you have to have some conical distribution of pellets, a little bit up, a little bit down, a little bit left. And there's nothing at all to indicate such an impact against the armrest of the couch on its right side as you look at it, left side of the couch as Mr. Menendez would have been sitting, nor have I seen any reference to any pellets having struck the TV changer. Sorry. Okay. Now, is there anything about these wounds that make it consistent that at a time that they were that make them inconsistent that at the time they were inflicted, both Mr. and Mrs. Menendez were standing in some position relative to each other to share the shotgun round that got him in the left elbow and right forearm and her on her left side? No, I can't think of anything that's inconsistent with their having been standing, and in fact, it's highly unlikely that they were sitting. making it, reasonable to believe that they were standing. Therefore, you're really dealing with them standing, he says. And is it true that there's a great deal more potential variations in their relative positions vis-a-vis each other and in their relative positions with respect to the guns if they're standing? Objection leading, overruled. The answer is yes. Just keep in mind the movement from sitting to standing. Now I'm standing, now I'm sitting. How about the distance that I traversed to get to this straight upright position? If you want to do it inch by inch, 6-inch increments, you've got all kinds of, do I get up by pushing down on the armrest? Do I get up by pushing into the couch with the palm of my right hand? This is what I mean by a mobile dynamic situation. There's no way in the world to know what somebody was doing at that precise fraction of a second when the shot was fired. I want to turn your attention now to another wound that you've examined and I believe formed an opinion about, and that's a wound that Dr. Golden calls number 5 to Mr. Menendez's left thigh. First of all, with respect to that leg wound, did you form an opinion as to whether that was an antemortem versus postmortem wound? Yes, I have an opinion. And what is your opinion? In my opinion, that is an antemortem wound. And do you have an opinion as to whether or not Mr. Menendez was in the position in which he is found by the police and is shown in the photographs that are on chart 304 and demonstrated in photographs A, B, C, and F on 304 at the time that the wound was inflicted? Yes, I have an opinion. And what is your opinion on that? In my opinion, Mr. Menendez was not seated as his body is shown in those photos when that wound was sustained. So this now makes what, three, four, five? I've lost count. However many witnesses so far that we've had from the defense that all say this scene could not be reconstructed, and the way that the decedents were positioned is not the way that they were positioned when the shootings began. So we know it's a moving, dynamic situation and very multifaceted and complex. And yet, mechanical engineer Dr. Roger McCarthy figured it all out. And with respect to the leg wounds in that area of the leg, are there arteries, various parts of, if you will, the femoral arterial system that are in the general area of the femur bone? Yes, the femoral artery, which is a good sized artery that comes down from the groin area, uh, some canal, I don't know how to say that, some canal, and proceeds. It moves somewhat medially as it proceeds downward, and in that area, it's pretty much alongside the medial or inner aspect of the femur, the large bone that goes from the hip to the knee. So you would have some area there. If the artery had not been examined as it was by Dr. Golden, that would have been seen by him in examining that wound. It's something, in other words, that would have been readily observable. And I'm told in the amended report of September 95, the second page, that Dr. Golden dissected the area, the wound path, and the femoral fracture, and no perforations were evident. So I believe that had that artery had been, I believe that had that artery been perforated, we would have known about it. In the absence of perforation of the artery, you're not going to get a great deal of bleeding. You will get some hemorrhaging, obviously, from smaller vessels, and Dr. Golden so described that in his original autopsy report in wound number 5, page 7, where he states there is hemorrhaging alongside the entire path, as well as the fracture described above. So we have hemorrhaging, and it was considered by Dr. Golden to be an antemortem wound in his covering notation. I believe that it was an antemortem wound, and the reason there was not more extensive hemorrhaging is because the artery was not perforated. It was a lot of resiliency, a lot of tensile flexibility. Mr. Menendez, a relatively young man, 45, did not have a lot of arterial sclerosis or something. I don't know. And vessels like that can remain intact. The blast effect can simply push them aside. They have the ability to move. They're not rigid like a bone. They're elastic? Yes, elastic is a better term than the one that I used. In fact, part of the inner lining is called the lactic lamina. And in your experience, unless the artery takes a direct hit, it's perforated or is perforated. It does not tear just because a shotgun blast has passed nearby. It may not. I would not state it as you did. 100 out of 100, it's not going to. But it's not all rare or infrequent that it will not lacerate because of that ability to have elastic displacement and recoil. And if you dissect down to the break in, the femur, as Dr. Golden did, had the artery been lacerated, would that have been easily observable to him? Oh, yes, there's no question that it would have been something that he would have seen. Now, is there something about the scene, the way that it appears, that supports your conclusion that Mr. Menendez was not seated when that wound occurred? The leg wound occurred. Yes, there is. And what is that? First of all, I want to say that the two middle diagrams are not correct because they show a downward angle, which is simply not what was measured. There's only a difference there's only a difference of 1 inch between the entrance of Mr. Menendez's left thigh inner or medial aspect and the exit wound on the lateral aspect of his left thigh. A 1 inch difference. You can see, looking at the green rod, the green line that has been placed there by, I believe, by Dr. McCarthy or his colleagues, and you see a downward angle that simply is not what was measured by Dr. Golden. So then you get into the question, well, how could that shot be fired by somebody sitting behind if you don't have that kind of a downward angle? It's not so easy. Again, I can't say it's not possible, but it sure would require some contortion because you have a horizontal wound. So it's not a matter of somebody being in back of the couch and shooting downward because you don't have that downward trajectory. You don't have that angle of declination. Another thing is a blast. Looking at the wound that you see on Mr. Menendez top right corner F, you can see a little bit of it, top left corner A, and you can see, well, that's it, pretty much on the set of photos. Well, let me stop you for a minute. There are many, many other photos. I don't need them to make my opinion. I know, but it shows both sides of this particular wound. If I may continue, what I want to say is again, you have a wound that is being blasted outward, and the wound going in was measured at about 3 by 3, and the exit wound, was measured at about 4 by 3. So it's a significant wound and it's blowing out soft tissue. Well, where is the soft tissue? Where is the blood? Where is the soft tissue? Where are the pellets? The pellets had not dispersed prior to entrance. Here, you have a consolidated wound and the pellets stick together, going through the thigh, and they come out making one exit wound. Now, they come out, and you've got all those pellets. Well, where are those pellets? I don't find any reference to pellets having been found in that area. If you draw a straight line on a somewhat of a diagonal over to the right of the couch, we look at to the left, where was Mr. Menendez as he sat on it if he had been sitting there? Where is some tissue? Where is some blood spattering? This is a very forceful wound. And I think then that it is extremely unlikely, based upon all of these things that I've talked about. I'm tempted to say just not physically possible for him to have had that wound sustained sitting on the couch in the position in which we see his body in these photos and others that the ladies and gentlemen of the jury have already seen. Now, What I want to go to I want to go to the next board and talk about the wound that Dr. Golden called number 7 to Mrs. Menendez. This is Exhibit 319. Let me ask you, first of all, if you have an opinion with respect to number 7, if you can see it being both aspects of it in 319F, the photograph in the upper right column. Do you have an opinion with respect to which of those two wound areas was the entry and which was the exit? Yes, I do. And with respect to that opinion, is that opinion in conflict with the opinion that appears in the autopsy report of Dr. Golden? Yes. Mine is essentially the reverse of what Dr. Golden's opinions in is in the autopsy report under his description of wound 7, page 8 of his original autopsy. And which of those sites that appear in photograph 319F do you believe is the entry wound? Under May I, sir? The court says, please. The witness said he's probably asking to go closer to the images. He says the wounds here on the outer or lateral aspect and somewhat lower down of Mrs. Menendez's left thigh is the wound of entrance. The wound with the body, again in the anatomical position, moved upward and more towards the front, producing several exit wounds. Dr. Golden, in my opinion, has that reversed. He called the upper wound a more medial wound of entrance, and he called the wound more lateral and lower down wound of exit. It's the opposite. The wound was caused by the blast going in, making a large defect, and then making multiple exit wounds. That's what happens. You don't have, again, consistent with what we talked about before in the context of another wound on Mr. Menendez, you don't have multiple pellets going in, producing several sites of entrance, and then coming back together again, producing one exit defect. And based on the measurement description that Dr. Golden gave, which may not be totally observable in the photo, was that entire area of the top where there are individual defects a larger area than the diameters of the area on the bottom that you are saying is the entrance wound? The answer is yes. He tells us that what he calls the entrance wound was located 24 to 27 inches from the left heel. So that gives you a 3-inch span. He tells us that he called exit, that what he tells us what he called exit was 20 and a half to 23 inches, which is 2.5 inches. So the area covered by the multiple injuries of the upper inner aspect of the left thigh covers a region that was somewhat larger than the measured single wound, somewhat lower down and more lateral on Mrs. Menendez's left thigh. And so, does your opinion that the lower one is clearly the entrance and the upper wounds are exit? That's consistent with the general rule that the exit will be over a larger area than the entrance. Yes. And more importantly, is the fact that you've got multiple wounds of exit of individual pellets or even smaller conglomerates, pellets, producing the exit wound higher up, and you've got the entrance wounds lower down when all the pellets were still together. Now, did you, in addition to forming an opinion about the entry and exit of number 7, did you analyze 3 wounds that Dr. Golden numbered on Mrs. Menendez as 7, this one, 8, which is a series of in and out, again below and above the knee wound, and 9, which he calls a graze or gutter wound to her left calf? Yes, I did. And did you find or did you have an opinion as to whether any of those wounds are affiliated? Any of those separately numbered wounds are affiliated, potentially affiliated with each other? Yes, I do believe so. And which wounds do you believe are affiliated? In other words, are part of a single wound or a single round of ammunition fired? I believe there's a strong probability that Mrs. Menendez's wound 9 and 7, as numbered by Dr. Golden, were related. I think that the wounds entered further down on the left calf, giving what he, Dr. Golden, referred to as a graze or gutter wound, and then proceeded on upward and entered into the wound of the lateral lower aspect of the left thigh and continued up as we have talked. I think that wound 9 and 7 in that order, and I give them in that order because I think 9 occurred first and the shotgun blast continuing upward producing wound number 7. Okay. Now, with respect to 7, well, strike that. On the x ray and based on a description by Dr. Golden, is there one or more fractures of Mrs. Menendez's left femur? Yes, the femur had a fracture, the left femur. And do you have any opinions about relative to wound 8, the one that goes in and out again, the wound 7, as to which of those two caused the fracture of the femur? In my opinion, it seems more likely, given the anatomical location of these wounds, that the fracture of the left femur, the distal third, down towards the knee joint, was sustained when Mrs. Menendez was shot with wound number 8. That's the in and out through the knee area. The popliteal, I don't know, which is the back of the knee, and then back in again. That seems to fit more likely. All right, now I just want to talk about some of the other wounds using Dr. Golden's numbering system that Mrs. Menendez sustained without pulling all the photographs out at this point. First of all, you're familiar with the wounds that Dr. Golden calls 2 and 3 to the right side of Mrs. Menendez's face and the collarbone area? Yes, I am. And with respect to those two wounds, in your opinion, is it possible that both of those wound areas on the right side of her face were caused by the same round of ammunition? That is a possibility. I cannot exclude nor include with reasonable medical certainty, but I think that it is quite reasonable to put those two wounds together as having been sustained in the same shotgun blast. I cannot be sufficiently certain to state in with reasonable medical certainty or reasonable medical probability, but it is something that would have to be considered. Again, it's just indicative of what I've been trying to convey that you've got to be very careful, and some things just are not susceptible to definitive analysis. And with respect to your opinions that that's a likely possibility, have you relied to any extent on the testimony of Dr. Golden from the first trial, where he also indicated that those wounds could have been caused by the same blast? Well, I'm aware of that. I can't say I relied on it. It was helpful, but I've got to be consistent with myself too. I can't, where he agrees with something that I've said or vice versa, everything is fine, whereas I disagree, then it's not so fine. He has his opinion, and I think it's important to me. I never disregard the opinions of another forensic pathologist who has done the autopsy. I think it's important to know what she or he opined, analyzed at the time, but I'm aware that he expressed the same degree of concern and had some pause as I have expressed. All right. Now, do you also affiliate with 2 and 3, or potentially affiliated with 2 and 3, number 10, which is the wound on her right hand? Yes, I do. Now, here I state with very strong, reasonable medical certainty that wound, number 10, Mrs. Menendez's wound on her right hand, again using Dr. Golden's numbered sequence, was associated with wounds 3 and or 2 of Mrs. Menendez. Obviously, if 2 and 3 were one wound, 10 goes with 2 and 3. If 2 and 3 are different wounds, then her wound number 10 of the right hand could have been associated with either. I would kind of lean towards number 3, wound number 3. If the separate 2 and 3 as separate wounds, as individual wounds, then I think her right hand injury number 10 most probably was a wound that came as the first part of the continuing blast to the right side of his face, which Dr. Golden labeled as number 3. Now, with respect to a classical defensive type of posture, having the hands up near the face? Yeah, sure. Now, having described, we'll strike that. Do you have an opinion concerning the severity or lethality, if you will, of wounds 2 and 3, whether they occurred together or separately? Well, I believe that wound number two would most likely have been a fatal wound, and I believe that wound number three, if it were separate, most likely would have been a fatal wound. So, I don't mean to interrupt you. No, I'm finished. Are there vital structures in the clavicle area that just that area alone that could cause death? Well, there are, but I can't conjecture on that because we don't have any discussion of lacerations of the major branches. The answer to your question is yes. As the aorta, the great artery, comes up from the heart, it branches off, and you've got the branching over to the shoulder and the arm. The subclavian is the common carotid going up into the neck and so on, and the branching. The common carotid is down around here. You could have those lacerated. He doesn't describe that. You don't have to get into that because you've got these pellets back inside the cranial vault inside the brain. It's an admixture of two and three and number one with the birdshot of the left side. So you got a mixture of birdshot and buckshot. Buckshot comes from two and three, birdshot comes from one, and you've got both of them present inside the cranial vault involving the brain. So I don't see how anybody could cleave one out from the other. Okay. How far, you said earlier that you thought you could, at least with respect to sequencing, determine which wound to each of the decedents was the last. Do you recall that? Yes, I did say that. And with respect to Mrs. Menendez, which wound, in your opinion, was the last? Number one of the left cheek area. And assuming number one was last, I take it that means that two and three happened first before that? Not first, but let's say before. Before that. Before that, yeah. Because I don't know if they happened first. I know, I don't mean first ever. I mean before number one. Yes. And the question was, forget number one, let's assume number one never happened. Were two and three by themselves fatal? Oh, yes, there's no way she could have been salvaged if two or three separate or two and three combined. Now, with respect to number one, to the left cheek, was there something different about that wound with respect to, in your opinion, based on looking at it and also based on the amendment that Dr. Golden filed in September of 1995, as compared to the other wounds to Mrs. Menendez, was that wound different on the issue of whether it was before death, during death, or after death? It appears that that wound occurred around the time of death. That's a period of time that we refer to as perimortem, which means around death. It's possible it was postmortem because you're not seeing as much hemorrhaging in that area as we might expect to find. Also, because it comes after two and three and was a contact wound, then, as we've already discussed, two and or three would have been fatal. Then it follows that what what Mr. Menendez, what Dr. Golden called wound number one of the left cheek area was inflicted as Mrs. Menendez was dying or already dying. So the left cheek, this is what I said from the beginning. This is what I've been saying, that Mrs. Menendez was already likely on her way out, the cheek, the coming back. So because they keep saying like, oh, it was horrible that what the brothers did, and they reloaded and came back and shot her in the face. Well, yes, they did, but she very likely wasn't going to survive the wounds that she had prior to that face shot. So, regardless of whether Lyle ever went and reloaded, this witness is saying Mrs. Menendez was already she was dying or already dead at that point when she received that cheek wound. So, she would not have survived prior to Lyle reloading, which I think is a huge point in the whole, intent. And they were such horrible, cold hearted, money hungry criminals. No, no, they weren't. They were just trying to get themselves out of a horrible situation. Now, given the directions of wounds number 2 and 3, as described by Dr. Golden, and from what you could see in the photographs, is the direction and the placement of the wound sites in 2 and 3 entirely consistent with Mrs. Menendez standing up when she received 2, 3, and 10? Oh, yes, definitely. Quite consistent with standing. Now, Dr. Wecht, in forensic pathology, strike that. Let me just ask you one other question. This is exhibit number 11. I've shown you this photograph briefly before when you first came trying to testify, correct? Yes. And are you aware that Dr. Lawrence brought that photograph and testified that when he first observed the wound that is depicted in 211, he believed that it was a post-mortem wound and that only after he performed his autopsy did he come to the understanding that that was the cause of death and therefore it had to be an antemortem wound. Do you remember that testimony of his? Yes, I do. Is there anything about the way that wound appears that would lead you to even consider that it was a post-mortem wound? No. To me, it looks like a wound that I would consider for openers is an antemortem wound. It's hemorrhagic, hem, is bleeding. Tissues are glistening. Nothing here that is consistent with or inconsistent with its being antemortem. Nothing here that is indicative or suggestive of it being postmortem. Now, in forensic pathology, in your experience in that field, have you had the opportunity, have you not, to see in person and in photographs many, many crime scenes, correct? Yes. And you have seen many, many crime scenes where there have been numerous rounds fired, correct? Yes, and I've seen one with as many rounds fired as here, but certainly I've seen several which have had multiple rounds fired. There have been several. And based on, or when considering the number of rounds fired that involve vital areas of the body, is there a concept that you have referred to and do refer to called overkill? Yes. It's a kind of semi technical, somewhat descriptive term that we use in forensic pathology. It's not limited to gunshot wound cases. You see it in stab wound cases and blunt force cases. It simply means that objection, no foundation, irrelevant. The court says no foundation and what? No foundation and irrelevant. Ms. Abramson says, the witness is answering the question, may he be permitted to answer? The court says, are you referring to a description of wounds in connection with this concept of overkill? Yes, Your Honor. The court says, you're not referring to the state of mind of the perpetrator of the crime? No, Your Honor. Overruled. Ms. Abramson says, are there situations where you see more wounds than actually in any way are required to bring about death? Yes. And you see that not just in shootings, but often in stab wounds and blunt force trauma cases. Yes. And in shooting cases where you see overkill, does that tend to be a distribution of wound areas over what appear to be random parts of the body? Objection, irrelevant, no foundation. Overruled. Yes, you see that. And also, by the way, with stab wounds and blunt force injuries, which brings you back to something which we talked about, the dynamic mobility of a situation in which a victim, if not sleeping, unconscious, drugged, or incapacitated, is obviously going to do what any human being is going to attempt to evade, to lessen the impact, to get away from the assailant, and some movements on the part of the assailant, obviously in response to those evasive actions by the victim. So you just don't know how things are, even if you knew, even if you could have had a picture taken at the very onset and shown to you, and know, just hypothetical, of course, that this is the way it all started. And then you wind up later with multiple wounds and injuries. So, how do you go back to that? A couple of things you might be able to do, but to go back to go from that one and to follow each and every one thereafter and so on is impossible. Now, one other question, which is we've established, which one of the wounds to Mrs. Menendez you believed was the last. Which one was the wounds to Mr. Menendez that you believe was the last? I believe that the wound that he sustained to the back of his head, which Dr. Golden referred to in his original autopsy report as wound number 1 on page 3, shotgun number 1, I believe that that was the last wound to Mr. Menendez. And one other question, Dr. Wecht, with respect to Mr. Menendez's shirt, you said you looked at it. In your opinion, looking at that shirt at this point in time, does that have any use whatsoever in trying to determine the nature of the wounds or the direction of any wounds or the direction of any fire? No. It would be of some value, maybe, in trying to talk about the nature of a wound. You might still be able to say, gee, it's inconsistent with a gunshot wound. But in terms of the direction, I would say no. The drying, the effect of the drying of the blood on the fibers, the shirt having been folded, unfolded, compressed, and laid out, and so on, in my opinion, all of those physical events, some that would just have occurred unknowingly and in an uncontrolled fashion, others that took place because of the unnecessary maneuvers entailed in its examination, would make an examination many years later on the shirt for purposes of trying to determine direction of the shot through the shirt scientifically implausible and invalid. Thank you. I have nothing further, Your Honor. The court says cross examination. Mr. Khan says yes. Mr. Khan says, Doctor, can you tell us how many shotgun wounds you've observed? How many autopsies that you have done concerning shotgun wounds? Haven't we been through all of this already? Like, why do we have to do this all over again? Oh, I would just estimate maybe about 100 over a period of 34 years, actually 35 plus, because I saw a couple of them in the Air Force. But anyway, over about 3.5 decades, maybe 100. You said you never saw one like this before concerning number of shots fired? That's correct. And can you tell us what was the largest number of shots fired that you ever observed in autopsies in which you've personally conducted the autopsies? I think there was one with 5 to 6 shotgun blasts, and then a few with 2, 3, or 4, something like that. Would you say that most of the cases that you've worked on involving shotgun wounds were single shots? Yes, I would say the majority were single. And you've only handled a handful of cases involving multiple shotgun wounds. Well, I would say more than a handful. I don't know how many. Probably about 20 or 25 of the approximate 100 might be more than one. So I don't know what you mean by handful, but I would agree that it would have been a smaller portion of the total number of the shotgun cases that I've had. And now, you don't disagree with the notion that in some cases a reconstruction can be done? Sequence of wounds can be determined, do you? It depends then on how you define that. If you're asking me, is it possible in some instances where you've got a couple or 3 shots and you know a fair amount about the scene and so on, I think that in many cases it is possible. But if you then talk about the circumstances of the case with 2 shooters and 2 victims and a dozen or more shots, then it is my opinion that such a premise is not plausible. So you're just saying in this case you can't do a reconstruction, not that you couldn't do it in other cases. That is that correct? Yes, in other cases, which with a much smaller number of shots with 1 shooter and 1 victim and more precise examination, perhaps I think that in some of those instances it could be done. And what would you say is the maximum number of shots to a single victim for which you could do a reconstruction? I don't have a special number. I really don't know. I think certainly once you get past 3 or 4 shots, again with a victim who was able to move, then you're into a very, very tenuous reconstructive type of analysis. Well, do you mean 3 or 4 shots or 3 or 4 wounds? Well, I meant them synonymously. I didn't mean entrance, exit, and entrance and exit would be one wound in the statement I just made. Say shots then for clarification. Thank you. So I would say that if somebody has been shot more than 3 or 4 times, then I would have a very difficult time if that person had not been restrained or incapacitated. Now, in your opinion, how many times was Jose Menendez shot? I think Mr. Menendez was shot definitely once in the back of the head, which was the last shot. Definitely once in the left leg, which is the second shot, and the left elbow, which is the third shot. And the 2 shots in the arm, but there's a possibility. So the answer to your question, sir, is definitely 4 and possibly 5. Okay. And before the 4 that you're referring to as definite would be the shot of the back of the head and the shot to the leg and the shot to the right arm. And the shot to the left arm, is that correct? Yes, that's correct. And those are the 4. And if you separate wounds 2 and 3 as numbered by Dr. Golden on Mr. Menendez's right arm, then that's what gives you 5. Okay, all right. Let's focus a little bit on the shots to the right arm of Jose Menendez. I believe that you indicated that Dr. Golden described a gunshot wound number 3 to the 6 pellets, the 6 pellet defects to the inside of the right arm. Is that correct? Would you ask that once again, please? Yes, I believe that you testified on direct examination that Dr. Golden described as gunshot wound number 3 the 6 pellet defects to the inside of the right arm. Is that correct? No, I do not recall saying that. In talking about number 3, we talked about the entrance in the posterior lateral aspect and the exit on the medial aspect of the right upper arm. And then we talked a little bit about those additional smaller adjacent sites as to whether they could have been some supplemental exit wounds for number 3. I don't recall talking about pellet wounds being wounds of entrance for number 3. Let me put up on the board the wound that I'm referring to so that we can take a look at it as we speak. I'm putting on the board exhibit number 295. Directing your attention to the pellet defects that appear in photograph B, which are these 6 pellet defects in the side of the right arm. Can you tell me, according to Dr. Golden's numbering system, how he identifies that particular wound? Well, he identifies the large defect that you see as a wound of exit. But I think you asked me about the smaller wounds. Is that correct? Yes, sir. I'm concerned about the smaller defect pellets. Excuse me. In his original autopsy report, he talks about multiple individual pellet wounds on the dorsal aspect. In his amended report of September 25th, 1995, he deletes that portion and then he talks only about the large defects on the posterior lateral aspect of the upper right arm as being the wound of entrance. That wound that we're talking about, those are not on the dorsal aspect. No, I would say those are essentially anterior, pretty much anterior with the arm in the anatomical position. Getting back to my original question, can you tell us, according to his numbering system, how he identifies that particular wound there? Well, I would say he doesn't tell us about those in his original autopsy report because he talks in his original autopsy report of multiple individual pellet wounds on the dorsal aspect. As you have just pointed out with your previous question, we're not looking at the dorsal aspect, we're looking anterior aspect. So I would say, as I read through his report of 1989, that those specific satellite defects are not referred to. All right. So, if he doesn't refer to that particular wound, does he at least refer to the wound which you said is the entry wound to gunshot wound number 3? That is the wound on the back portion of the right arm. In his original report, he did not. In his amended report, he describes it and tells us that it was about 2 inches in diameter. So, is it your testimony then that in his 1989 report, he failed to make reference to this wound to the inside of the right arm as well as the wound to the back side of the arm? No. He did make reference in his original report to the large area of the medial aspect. That was specifically referred to as 6 by 4 inches, which is the same measurement he gives us in his amended report of 1995. So that wound, the large one that we see just below the right armpit, is the same described by Dr. Golden in 1989. As it was referred to in his amended report of 1995, you'll see exactly those same measurements. I'm not talking about that. Oh, you're not talking about that? No, I'm asking you according to your understanding of the report of Dr. Golden, his 1989 report, failed to mention both the satellite defects that appear on the inside of the right arm as well as the smaller 2 by 2 or maximal diameter of 2 inches, which he now describes in his 95 report as being on the back of that arm. Ms. Amerson says, I'm going to object as compound, Your Honor. Overruled. The witness says, that is correct. So he failed to mention 2 of the 3 wounds to the right arm. Is that your understanding? In his original autopsy report, we don't have the description of that 2-inch diameter entrance wound and the posterior lateral or rear position of the upper arm, and I don't see a mention of individual pellet wounds anteriorly adjacent to the large exit wounds on the medial aspect of the right upper arm. Are you sure you're not confusing wound number 2 with wound number 3? You're asking me about 3, is that correct? I'm asking you if he described anywhere in his record. Well, I was describing number 3. I'm sorry, I thought you said number 3. Now, looking at the number 2 wound in the 89 report, here he talks about pellet wounds below the right shoulder level, and those could be the small separate wounds that we see adjacent to the large defect. I'm looking at his measurements. He says they're located in a spread of 12 to 17 inches below the top of the shoulder. That's what gives me pause because that doesn't look to me like it's 12 to 17 inches, a foot to a foot and a half. And he also talks about the antecubital fossa, which is the crease in front of our elbow. So the only answer I can give is it is possible. The only answer I can give is it is possible in his original description of wound number 2 on page 4 of his autopsy report that the pellet wounds referred to there are the pellet wounds that we see in the middle picture of the far left column. Well, how far would you say those pellet wounds, those individual pellets in photograph B, would be from the shoulder? It's hard to say for sure because of the deformity caused by the fracture of the humerus. It is possible that they could be the ones that he is referring to, allowing for that deformity. It is possible that they would fall within that range of 12 to 17 inches down from the top of the shoulder. Now, wouldn't it be correct to say that in his original 1989 report, Dr. Golden gave the opinion that the large defect appearing on this arm, his right arm, might be the exit wound to those individual pellet defects, which he described as shotgun wound number 2. He says about that wound after giving 6 by 4 measurements. Quote, this appears to be related to one of the shotgun wounds of the right upper extremity, either 2 or 3, likewise confirming that the trajectory is distal proximal and lateral medial. I think that's what you're asking me about. That's correct. Yes, that's what he says. Right. So he took the opinion that that large defect, which we see here in photograph B, could be the exit of this wound that we see immediately below it. Well, he says that it could be one or the other. It's hard for me to see how that could be. Here, again, you've got individual pellet wounds, and then you're not going to get that together, and they're not going to then get together and make one 6 by 4 inch defect. You asked me, what did he say? And the answer is he says that that large defect we see in that picture might be related to wounds 2 or 3. Okay. But then, if that could possibly be the exit to wound number 2, when he describes these pellet defects as wound number 2, can you tell us what he describes as wound number 3? Your Honor, at this point, I'm going to object. This is irrelevant. Overruled. The only thing I can tell you is what we've talked about with wound number 3 when he talked about pellet wounds on the dorsal aspect. I can't be sure. I can only go by his amended report of 6 years later, in which I assume that he reanalyzed, restudied, and set forth what he considered to be a corrected or reversed presentation of the actual wounds. Well, I'm just asking you for the moment what he described as wound number 3 in the 1989 report, such that the large wound here, which we are looking at, could be an exit to or an exit from. Miss Abramson says, asked and answered, Your Honor. Overruled. The witness says, he describes it clearly in the 89 report as an exit wound. You asked me, to what does he connect it? You've asked me in part in an earlier question, and I said that he set forth the fact it could be associated with wound 2 or 3. If he's talking about 2, then he's talking about pellet wounds that we see here. And he's talking about wound number 3, then he's talking about pellet wounds we do not see on these pictures, which are located around the back of the arm, if we go by what Dr. Golden sets forth in his 89 report. Well, where in his 89 report does Dr. Golden say that this large defect, which we are looking at here, could be an exit wound to the wound on the back of the arm? Oh, that's what we just read a little bit ago. I'll repeat it. On page 6 of the final portion of the discussion of his discussion of wound number 3, after stating that that's an exit wound and telling us it measures 6 by 4 inches, he says, this appears that large defect there, elbow, the right armpit. He says this appears to be related to one of the shotgun wounds of the right upper extremity, either 2 or 3. Yes, and what is wound number 3? That's what I just said. The only in his wound 3 in 89, he talks about pellet wounds on the dorsal aspect of the right upper arm. Of the dorsal aspect of the right upper arm? Are you certain about that? Well, he says right forearm, dorsal aspect of the right forearm in there. That's been corrected, is my understanding. Well, I'm sorry. Just referring to his report. All right. He said that this wound here, this large wound, could be the exit wound to a wound in his forearm. Is that correct? That's what he said. Yes, in 89. Sorry, guys, I had to pause for a second and I lost my place. So I usually try to highlight where I left off, but I didn't do that this time. I thought my dog needed to go outside. Um, so let me back up just a second here. So the question was of the dorsal aspect of the right arm. Are you certain about that? Well, he says right forearm, dorsal aspect of the right forearm in there. That's been corrected is my understanding. Well, I'm sorry. Just referring to his report. All right. He said that this wound here, this large wound, could be the exit wound to a wound in his forearm. Is that correct? That's what he said. Yes, in 89. Well, let me show you a photograph. But you see the measurement doesn't fit. Why is it the measurement doesn't fit? Because we just talked about his location of those pellet wounds that you see in the middle photo between 12 to 17 inches, and now that's clearly above the forearm. And now he talks about the forearm and he gives us a measurement of 14.5 inches below the top of the shoulder. So he's got the forearm at an anatomical place higher up than those injuries we see, which are clearly on the right upper arm. Well, didn't you just tell us that these individual pellet defects in B could be shotgun wound number 2? Objection, Your Honor, misstates the testimony. The court says you're asking, did he say that? Did he say that that's what Dr. Golden reported in his report? Yes, that's the question. The witness says, no, we didn't. No, we were talking before about 3 and about Dr. Golden. You're asking me in his 89 report, are those pellet wounds what we see They're possibly the wounds to which Dr. Golden refers in his description of wound number 2. Mr. Khan says, correct. That's my question. The answer is yes. As I said, that could be what he's referring to in his wound number 2. That's right. Okay. Now, assuming that this is what Dr. Golden is referring to as wound number 2, he indicates that this exit wound, this large wound, is an exit to either wound number 2, which, as you said, might be the wound to the inner right arm, might be, or wound number 3. Is that correct? That's what he said. That's right. What is wound number 3 according to the 89 report? Your Honor, this has been asked and answered. Overruled. The report speaks for itself, Miss Abramson says. Overruled. The witness says he refers to multiple individual pellet wounds on the dorsal aspect of the right forearm. Mr. Khan says, okay. He describes wound number 3 as consisting of a wound on the right forearm. Is that correct? That's right, in the 89 report. And then in 1995, he deleted all reference to that forearm altogether. Is that correct? That's correct. Okay, now, is it your opinion that Dr. Golden is correct that the large wound that we are looking at in photograph B could be an exit wound to the pellet defects that we see on the inside of the right forearm, sorry? No, in my opinion, it could not be. Is it your opinion that the exit wound which we are looking at in photograph B could be an exit wound to pellets which entered the right forearm of Jose Menendez? No. So you disagree significantly with many of the opinions of Dr. Golden, is that correct? Yes, I do disagree with several of his opinions, but I do not want to say relevant to your question and this comment that Dr. Golden did amend his written report, so many of the differences referable to his original descriptions of wounds 2 and 3 are obviated. They are no longer in the pot or formula to be considered. So there's much less disagreement based upon his amended report of 95, which, as you know, I had nothing to do with. I never spoke with Dr. Golden, so I had no influence on him whatsoever. I know nothing about it. I'm just saying that there's far less difference. You never spoke with Dr. Golden, is that what you're telling us? That's correct. Who have you conferred with? Miss Abramson? Miss Abramson says, I'm going to object as irrelevant and calling for hearsay. Overruled. The witness says, Attorney Abramson, and that's all. Very briefly, a couple of Sundays ago for a few minutes with Dr. Fackler. That's all. Mr. Khan says, okay, and you've accused Dr. Golden in the past of making unforgivable mistakes in his autopsies, haven't you? Objection irrelevant and no foundation. The court says, are you talking about this particular autopsy? No, another one, says Mr. Khan. Overruled, sustained, rather. I'm sorry, so sustained. Good. Okay, sustained. Ms. Abramson says, thank you, Your Honor. Court says, objection sustained. Mr. Khan says, in this case, Dr. Golden's original 89 autopsy, as reflected in his report, is a bit of a mess, isn't it? There are some things which are confusing and some things which had to be revised, which he did. There are other things which I disagree with. It was a complex case, and basically, we know where the wounds are. And I think that he approached it as a forensic pathologist would. Two people dead of multiple shotgun wounds. And I think it's just a straightforward presentation of these wounds and their locations. Well, even after writing the 92 amendment and writing the 95 amendment, wouldn't you agree that the reports of Dr. Golden are still somewhat unreliable? This is their state, you know, actor, their state employed person that works for the government. And they're like, you don't trust them? Like they're basically destroying their own forensic uh pathologist who did the autopsy, who did the actual autopsy, and they're discrediting him themselves, which I think is crazy. The witness says, I would agree there are portions of the autopsy report, even following the two amendments, that leave us somewhat confused. We don't have a clear, definitive picture. That is correct. So one of the reasons why we don't have a clear, definitive picture is because we don't know what he did with the wounds that he previously said existed in the right forearm of Jose Menendez. Is that correct? That's one thing, yes. And did you also notice that in his report he described recovering 15 individual lead pellets from the forearm of Jose Menendez or along the path of the forearm of Jose Menendez? Yes, and then I understand that he changed that to 2 pellets, but you're correct. In 85, he said 15 pellets. So he previously described wounds which he is no longer confirming the existence of, and previously described shotgun pellets that he no longer is confirming the existence of. Is that correct? Yes. Did you look at all of the original autopsy photographs taken by the coroner's office in this case? Yes, I believe I have. Do you know if they were taken by the coroner's office or if they were taken by the Beverly Hills Police Department? I thought there were two sets of photos from the police and the coroner's office, or were there two sets with the bodies there, one by the coroners and one by the police? Seems to me there might have been two separate sets. I voiced that with hesitation. Do you know whether any of the photographs in this case were lost by the coroner's office? That I do not know. And do you know whether the x-rays in this case were lost by the coroner's office? That I have been told happened. Somebody lost the original x-rays and they have the original reproductions or something. Yes. So you haven't looked at the original x-rays in this case because they were lost. Is that your understanding? That's correct. I have seen copies. They seem to be pretty good. And you're aware that the autopsy reports in this case weren't written until almost 2 months after the autopsy. Let's see. I don't know that independently, I recall. I'm trying to see in the autopsy report. The autopsy report tells us when he did it. Hold on, please. Let me see if there's a date at the end. I don't mean to question if you know that it was 2 months later. I accept that. I just don't know the dates. Here, hold on. I'm sorry. I see it. Here's the date I was looking for. It says October 13th, 1989. Let me get my dates right. And he did the autopsy on August 23rd, 1989. Is that correct? Yes. That would be a little less than 2 months. Probably about 7 weeks, I guess, something like that. And you're looking at the autopsy report for which victim in this case? And that was Jose that I just referred to. Directing your attention to the autopsy report for Mary Menendez, page 15. That one is signed out on the same date of October 13th, 89. Okay. So would you say that is standard practice among pathologists to write their autopsy reports almost 2 months after conducting an autopsy? Well, you are drawing a conclusion which may or may not be correct, but I think it's probably not correct. When you say to write it, I doubt very much that he wrote it on the day that he signed off on it. I would believe that he dictated it and then probably worked at it and so on and then released it. I can't tell you administratively, what happens in that office. I will say 7 weeks is a fairly long time, but I have some knowledge of the caseload of the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, just generally the number of bodies that they have, and so on, so I'm not really surprised. The autopsies in this case were conducted on what date? August 23rd of 89. Both of them? August 23rd of 89, both of them. That wasn't a question, sorry. And it's your understanding that the killings in this case took place on what date? I think on August 20th. So we're actually or yesterday, as you're watching this, was the anniversary of the homicides. So would that delay approximately a 2-day delay, more than 48-hour delay from the time of the killing, be standard practice among pathologists to conduct such an autopsy after such a delay? The answer is, and I don't mean to be facetious, humorous, or insulting to you good folks out here, but the answer honestly is no. The only place I know of is in Los Angeles, but that's an honest answer. So it is not common practice to wait 48 hours. So there's that. The court says, let's take our recess and we'll resume at 1:30. Don't discuss the matter with anyone and don't form any final opinions about it. We'll resume at 1:30. And that is where we will end for today and continue tomorrow with Cecil Wecht's, no, not Cecil, Cyril. Cecil's the other trial I'm doing, which is Delphi. There's a Christopher, Cecil, and a Cyril, whatever, get them confused. Cyril Wecht will be back tomorrow with his testimony for on cross right now. So we'll continue that and I will see you guys then. Thank you guys so much for watching. Take care. Bye now.